Well, obviously, you know the names of my mother and father, Sam and Lily, and I'm led to believe that when I was 2 years of age, I moved from Moss Side into corporation property. Mother and father had been on a list for a new home, and this was a relatively new building site, Withington, and we moved there when I was 2, which would be 1936. In 1937, I was 3, and I became very friendly with the family across the avenue, which I think you know about. Robert Burrows, Bobby Burrows, was my best friend for the whole of my life. But going back to my mother and father, obviously we lived in a cul-de-sac, and obviously had no memory at that time of motor vehicles transport. There was no cars in the road, no cars in the avenue at all. So it was perfectly safe for us to play out without any worries at all to our parents. When it was time for bed, you'd be called in and you'd go and get washed and put to bed. Eventually I started at an infant school in Old Moat, and then my first real memory of the war was when it broke up in 1939, and my father volunteered and he went in the RAF, which left my mother, myself and my sister Sylvia, who was only 3 at the time, and we had to sort of, well, it was a funny time. My memories of that particular time of the war breaking out was things changed dramatically, in as much as we were suddenly at night time had to draw curtains, no lights were to be shown,
yes,
and searchlights outside and wandering around the thing. We're looking for aircraft.
I'm going to suggest we just stop at that point for a second, because we'll come on to the war in a bit more detail.
Right, yeah, right.
And we'll just hear a little bit from Sylvia, because you were born really about 3 years after, weren't you? So.
Yes, yes, Lester was 3. I do have some very early memories that must be pre-war, because maybe it's just that I've been told about them. You never know what
That's
you've
correct.
seen and what you've been told.
Yes.
But there's an image in my head. We had a swing in the back garden, and they used to sit me on the swing, and Dad would sit on a chair reading his paper, just pushing the swing with his foot, not disturbing himself at all. He was always a master of doing 2 things at once. And I remember we had very good neighbours next door. They were Scottish and much older than my parents. The husband had served in the First World War and had been gassed. And I think I possibly must have started to go to nursery just before the war began.
Yes.
And that I remember, because we had these coarse grey blankets that had been blanket stitched all the way around with symbols on, and your symbol you stuck with, and that was on your coat hanger, and then after lunch you were put on these fold out army camp type beds.
Yes.
For a sleep. It doesn't happen now.
No.
And covered up with this grey rough blanket. And I remember having knits, and my mother went to the school and she played merry diddle with them. My daughters never had them. Well, of course, they like
right.
clean heads, you know.
Yes, that's right.
And they pass around, and she had to cut all my ringlets off.
Can you remember what school that was?
That was Old Moat.
Old Moat School, yes.
Old Moat School.
And you were both there, were you?
We were both there,
yeah,
yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we were 11.
Yes.
Yeah.
So perhaps you carry on from there then, Lester.
Yeah, well, obviously at 5 I was going to school, and then war broke out, but that didn't make a great deal of difference from memory of, I mean, because obviously there were teachers that disappeared, but I can't remember the names of my teachers in those days. So schooling, I would think, became a little bit easier in as much as you weren't pushed. But obviously it wasn't long before the war broke out. Now, my early memories of before the war were playing with the friends in the avenue was full of young families. There were
Yes.
lots of children in the road, boys and girls, mainly girls, lots of girls. And we all sort of played out together, perfectly safe, no transport. Then, of course, when war broke out, some of the parents obviously went in the army or the navy or the air force, and we lived at home. And that particular time, I can remember the air raid shelter being put up in the back, and I can remember my mother dressing it up. It was just like another home. They made it as comfortable as possible. But every time a warning came, the air raid warning came on, we all had to get out of the house and go into this shelter. I don't know if Sylvia can remember it, but it had a smell all of its own, didn't it?
It's the smell that
Yeah,
lingers with me.
it was
That
an
sandy
earthy smell,
yes.
earthy smell, because obviously it was about 6 feet under the ground, part of it. You were down steps to get into it. But when the air raid was on, it was quite exciting for me, because getting up and going out and in your pyjamas and going in this thing, and it was fully converted. There was bunks in it with blankets and all candles we had. Can't remember the candles, the smell of the candles. But that was the excitement of it. The other thing is, of course, suddenly my memory, I remember very much missing my father. Although he never went abroad, he was away and he didn't come home very often, but you know, it was lovely to see him when he did come home, but he didn't stay long. You know, it might be a weekend pass and then he'd have to go back. But at that particular time, there was just Sylvia and myself, and Mother used to take us into her bed. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
We used to sleep with just in the precaution, if there was an air raid on, it was quick to get us both up and down the stairs and out into the air raid shelter.
Tell me,
If you want me, sorry.
so, yes, I was going to say, tell me a little bit about your father, because he was called up, was he?
No,
He volunteered. They asked for volunteers, and
Yes.
tell him.
Tell
him about the getting in.
the what?
About the interview.
Oh, I don't remember that.
You do, when they asked him what he did.
What's that? So.
Well, for starters, he cheated to get in. He would never have been accepted because he had no sight in one eye.
Right.
And when he went for the medical, he was just asked, cover up your right eye and read that chart. Now cover up your left eye. And of course he did that.
Yes.
And read both sheets with his good... So he got in. But when he went, they were trying to classify them as to which service they were going in. And then you take it up.
Yeah. Well, they said, well, what can you do? So.
What's your job?
What's your job? And he said, a window dresser. They looked at him and said, what's a window dresser? He said, is it nothing? He said, no, nothing. Oh, he said, well, he said, are you any good at anything at all? He said, well, I could change a plug. So they said, oh, that's it. But you put you down as an electrician. So he went in the RAF and he did what was ever necessary, and he ended up, so I'm told years afterwards, he was on the ground staff, one of the repairmen that when the aircraft came back, they all used to shoot out and check it all over. And some of the planes that came back were so badly shot up, you know, that some couldn't be repaired and put back.
This was Bomber Command.
Oh yes,
Right.
He was doing Lancaster. He was on the Lancaster bomber, and one thing and another. All these stories were related to me when I was older, so
Yes.
you know they're not
Yeah.
a memory of when I was 7 or 8. You know, it was. I just knew that my father was away. There was a war on, and that was it. I had no idea of why we'd gone to war or anything like that. We weren't told anything like that.
Do you remember where he was stationed?
Well, yeah. But funny you should say that, because Sylvia came round with a card the other day, and on it she said that's where Dad was, North Creek. Now the name rang a bell, but I always remembered him being at Wellesbourne.
Yes.
That was my vivid memory. He was at Wellesbourne, which is in the Midlands.
That's right.
somewhere,
Yes.
Near Stratford. Yes.
Yes, near Stratford on Avon, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right.
And yeah.
And somehow we've got a picture of Mum, because she went down to Stratford and spent a weekend with him.
With them, yeah.
And she had that suit on with his RAF wings.
With the RAF badge on it,
stitched on her waistcoat, yeah. But I remember the raids because this Scotsman who lived next door was an ARP warden, and he would come into the house and wrap me up and carry me out. I do remember that. I mean, maybe being weighted and taken out to the shelter. And I do remember the smell.
Yes, yeah. Well, they weren't, going back to early childhood, after an air raid, they weren't actually planning to bomb anywhere where we lived. We weren't, but we were very close to Trafford Park, which was the main target. And then, of course, there was Salford. And both those places had factories that were doing nothing but munitions and building parts for them. I'll tell you a story that Father told me years afterwards. He said when he was called up and he went in the RAF, well, he wasn't called up, but when he went into the RAF and he eventually was stationed, I think his first one was Wellesbourne, wasn't it? I'm not sure.
I can't remember.
You know, just going back to 1940, we're talking about now. He said when we went on guard duty at the things, he said you had to do, each one of you took a turn, it might be one night a week, you'd be on charge. He said we didn't have rifles, we had no rifles, we used to march up and down with a brush day on our shoulder, you know, so if anybody was taking pictures, they would think we were fully armed. And it made me laugh at the time.
Dad's
but that, I mean, when we went into the war, we were so desperate. We'd got nothing. Absolutely. If Hitler had wanted, if he'd have come over here, we wouldn't be here anymore.
No, that's right. Yes.
My mother was very afraid of that. And of course the press magnified the horrors that Germany was carrying out. And in those days the gas came, we had a gas meter and you put pennies in it, the big old penny coins. And the gas man would come and empty it, and he would have little pieces of brown paper and he would put 12 pennies in it, roll them up, and then put them in a leather bag like a portmanteau. How he carried that from house to house, I mean, it must have been terribly heavy. But my mother said, after the war, long after the war, that she had enough money saved so that if the Germans actually invaded and set foot in England, she was going to gas the three of us.
Oh dear, yeah.
She was not going to live under German rule. That was absolutely not.
I mean, it must have been terrifying.
Yeah, for her, alone with 2 children. And but there was definitely a camaraderie that, among the neighbours.
Yes.
I mean, the rations were puny. Do you remember we used to
Oh,
walk to Spencer's? My mother
Yeah.
kept the grocer that she had when they lived in Moss Side, and
Yes.
she still walked right the way down Princess Road to this grocery with the two of us,
But, yeah.
and then we'd walk home with the little strip of bacon and the little packet of cheese. And then we had toast with butter on it, the whole butter ration.
Yeah, but
that
butter
night.
ration
That
going
was
won't
that
go.
was our weekly
Anyone
treat.
go.
We had
Yeah.
we
Yes.
had the butter, but there was a neighbour 2 doors down who had a recipe for expanding the. I guess it was the first low-fat spread, because she just used to make a sort of thick cornflour sauce, and then put the butter in it, mix it all up, and use that on bread. So it went 3 times as far. And my mother used to do that.
Don't
Yes.
forget salmon paste in the little jars.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And no fruit. And,
Yeah.
you know, you would come home from school and say, Mum, Evanses have got oranges, get the books out.
Yes.
And you'd have to get your ration books out and go and get your orange per book. But that wasn't often, you know,
Oh,
that
no,
was
no,
a very
no,
occasional. I
no,
never
no,
saw a
no.
banana the whole war. Didn't
No.
really know what bananas were till
No.
after the war.
Just going back to the early part of the war, the worst one I can ever remember was my mother had a sister, Annie, and she lived in Salford.
In Vernon Street.
Yeah, Vernon Street, Salford. And her husband was an engineer. So he wasn't called up because he was needed. He was a
was
machine man.
Metrovix.
Yeah, it was he was.
Yes.
They needed him more urgently building and making things than that. So my mother decided that we'd go and stay with her for Christmas.
Yes.
So it was Christmas 1940, which you probably have memories of, was one of the worst air raids we ever had to put up with. And all night long, because we were in Salford then, which was a big munition place as big as Trafford Park, probably bigger than Trafford Park at the time, because Trafford Park has grown since. But all through the night, from night time until dawn, and when the warning went off that they're all clear, we walked home, didn't we?
But this was a terraced house.
Yeah.
A long, long terrace.
Yes.
With maybe 30 houses on each side of the street. 2 up, 2 down. A sink straight into the front room off the doorstep.
Yeah.
Straight into the house off the pavement, and you were into the sitting room. And then at the back there was a kitchen with a stone sink and a cold water tap. And then there were very steep stairs up to 2 bedrooms. And then
The toilet was
there was a
outside.
yard
Yeah.
with
Yes.
the lavatory out there. And then the houses were back to back, and this ginnel that ran between the houses had been covered over with concrete slabs. So that was the shelter. So and at the ends there were canvas curtains. And that, I think, is my earliest memory of
Yeah.
the war, because I know I was crying and very distressed. And I was being moved from lap to lap. Everybody was out there sitting in this
Yes.
shelter all through the night. And I remember bits of burning stuff coming every time the blast would make the curtains move.
Yes.
How Salford didn't just
Well,
disappear,
somebody
I don't
didn't,
know.
but we survived, so much so that come daylight the following day, my mother said, "That's it, we're going home." She said, I can't stay here another night. She said, "I can't go through that." So we walked home from Salford over Marcaddy's Bridge. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but Marcaddy's
Yes, I do.
Bridge.
Yes, yes.
And I can remember going over the bridge, and we were very close then to Manchester Central coming, and you could see all the buildings on fire. It was total destruction.
And didn't we go down Stretford Road?
Yeah,
There wasn't a window in.
No, they're all gone. Yeah,
The road was just...
down Princess Parkway near Hume Grammar School, which we were very close to home then, and all the houses on one side of the road, all the roofs had gone off, you know, the tiles and everything. It It was terrible. But having said that, of course, I'm only a young boy. I can think of it now. But as I'm thinking of it now, I know how terrible it was. But as a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, it didn't really mean a lot. We knew that there was something going on, but it didn't register at that particular time. But my memory of it, of the destruction, is still vivid in my mind. You know, I can still remember all that.
And Anne and Bob went home with us, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They did. They bought a turkey
On the market.
on the following day, and it was that big it wouldn't go in my mother's oven. But she had to feed, because my uncle and my auntie and uncle came back with us, and his sister and his mother, I think, didn't she?
Rose, did they?
Yeah, they all came back to our house, and bearing in mind that although our house was a little bit bigger than theirs, it was better in as much as we got a room, a living room, a small kitchen,
and a bathroom.
Yeah,
with a
and an
loo
inside toilet,
Yes.
of course, which was a luxury.
Yeah.
But yes, hard times they were.
Now, were you evacuated at one point?
Yes, and that is another story. The reason I don't think about much about that is because I wasn't there long. But you've heard me talk of my very good friend Bob. He had a brother and a sister, and his father was a well man. He didn't go in the army.
He was too old.
Yes.
He was a lot older.
Oh,
than
yes, he
Mrs.
was a lot
Burroughs.
older than
Yes.
that. But Bob and his brother and sister were evacuated to Blackpool, and I was evacuated to Blackpool too. And the person that took me in had a shop, a baker's shop, but she was a horrible woman from what I can remember. She stitched my pockets up in my trousers so that I couldn't put anything in my pockets. And she was horrible to me. My mother used to come up whenever she could, bring Sylvia, carry Sylvia, and to me, and I must have, well, I did, I'm sure, break my heart, said, Mum, I don't want to stay here anymore, I want to come home. And she saw the distress I was in, and she said, enough's enough. And she brought me home.
And she brought you home with a problem, because that awful woman refused to let you use the toilet. She locked the door, locked him out to go to school or whatever, and then let him in when she thought it was the right time. So his body rhythm just went out. So when he came home, he had an impacted bowel, and he was taken to Pendlebury Hospital because they couldn't release it, and it was
Oh yeah,
it was very dodgy, because Pendlebury's miles away from Withington.
Yes.
She got me and her firstborn poorly in hospital. It must have been unbelievably hard for her.
Yeah.
She had a hard life. Yeah.
So most of the war actually was spent at home.
Yes.
Yes.
And I mean, there would have been, I don't suppose, I mean, your earliest memories, I would imagine, Sylvia, must have been, probably from about 1942 onwards?
Something like that, yes.
Sort of, whereas you would have been a bit earlier than that, sort of 39. So, but we've talked about things like rationing and so on, essentially, or the scarcity of food, let's put it that way.
Yes,
And I have to say, many people have talked about the shortage of bananas, unless you were extremely lucky.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, and that luck had a lot to do with it, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did.
But something we never went short of was chocolate, because in the forces, you got a ration. You also got a cigarette ration. Well, my father was never a smoker, and I don't suppose there were many men in his billet who didn't smoke. So he had no problem at all in swapping his fags for their chocolate ration.
Yes, of course.
And he had a little wooden box with padlocks on it, locks on it. And he used to bring that home when he came on leave and open it, and it was treasure trove. I mean, we weren't indulged, you know, it was rationed out, but there was chocolate, Mars bars and things like that. My mother would never have been able to afford to buy, you know, it's just not something.
I mean, you would probably have a record of when rationing ended. Would be sometime in the early 50s, would it?
It was about 1954, I believe.
1954.
Yes. I do remember it myself.
Yeah, well, 1954, I'm now 20 years of age.
That's right.
And
yes.
I've grown up from the end of the war with this rationing and not being able to do anything. Of course, 1954. I mean, I finished school I went to a senior school from 1945 for 4 years until 1949. And of course, my father came out 46, wasn't it, when he came out and went back to work. And I was still going to school at the time, but I can remember it, obviously with rationing on, there were no such things as a bar of chocolate or an Easter egg.
No.
And I can remember Father making these, Easter, making these little eggs out of marzipan, wasn't it?
Well, and the other thing he did was he blew eggs out and he'd made some sort of mixture with cocoa
in it, yeah.
And filled them.
He was quite artistic, my father.
Oh, he was. He was lovely, yeah.
He was clever, but he was from a family that were like that.
Yeah.
You know, he had two brothers that both were window dressers, Bill and Harry, and Jack, even Bob
was
Cunliffe,
a
Bob Cunliffe, that was the youngest brother. They all worked for a company called Windresco Limited, which was on Moulders Road, not far away. But they all travelled around on bikes, you know, didn't they? They all cycled to different shops and dressed the windows and one thing or other.
Yeah.
One thing that comes back to mind, he did always dress the window on Moulders Road. And there was a news agent there called Healy's. You remember the name Healy's? And of course, during the war, there was no cigarettes on sale outside. Used to have little wooden, metal kiosks bolted outside where you could put your money in and slide out a packet of cigarettes. Well, of course, during the war years, they were empty.
Yes.
So consequently, they rusted away. And I was with my friend Bob, and we were messing about with this machine, just pulling on the handle, and it came out. And it was full of coins.
Oh dear.
Rusted coins. Well, we gathered all this money, and there was. We went further down. There was another shop called Diamonds.
Yeah,
Do you remember
Diamonds? Diamonds. Yes.
They used to sell ice cream. So Bob and I, we bought a block of ice cream. And we ate the lot. We just ate that. We went absolutely mad with it, but that was it.
Well, when this is shown, perhaps the police will be waiting for you to arrest you. No.
Oh.
Yeah, but that's a vivid memory, of course.
Well, that's the first time I've ever heard that story.
Have you not heard that story? Have you not?
But a very hard thing that happened was that I think it was in 1942, because it was before Sammy was born. My mother, I think now, with hindsight, it was probably what's called an ectopic pregnancy. But she fell. She took a job cleaning to make a few shillings, £0.50 an hour or something like that. And she fell in the bathroom. And she got herself home. And she sent you and me to school. And she started to hemorrhage. And she just took herself up to bed. And she thought, I just don't want them to come home from school and find me dead, because she knew she was losing her lifeblood. And the bread man came, and he knew she should be in. And he knocked on the back door, and the back door was open. So he said, Mrs. Cunliffe, Lily. And he went upstairs and he found her. And of course, there were no telephones. Nobody had a phone in those days. No. So he got somebody to run to the nearest phone box and phone for an ambulance. and I'm coming home. We're coming home down Sillington Avenue. It's a cul-de-sac, you know, like a key shape with a circle at the bottom. And I'm sure I haven't imagined it. This trolley with my mother on it in a red blanket and a very white face being put in the ambulance. And the girl from the bottom house said, "Your mother's dead."
Oh.
So I don't know what happened to us after that, on that day, but you were sent to live with Auntie Elsie while she was in hospital. She had major surgery. They had to take one ovary away, and I went to live with Grandma. And earlier that year, I'd had my tonsils out, and of course it had to be a day case because they couldn't keep children in a hospital in central Manchester.
No.
The Ear, Nose and Throat Hospital was at All Saints.
Right.
So, and I'd never been in a taxi in my life. I think we went on the bus, but I came out post-op and very dopey. And so my mother took me home, and she pushed the 2 armchairs together in the living room and made a bed for me and lay me on there during the day. And somebody had given me an orange. And Kenny Schuff came in and ate it. Yes, he ate the orange. And they broke my pram. Do you remember?
Yeah.
My lovely pram. You used to take my doll's pram. They used to take each other for rides and snap the handle off it. So my dad got some copper pipe, and it had a copper handle on it.
Yes.
Of course, during the war, our family doubled, didn't it?
Well,
Because,
yes. Yes.
You know, in 1943, my brother, youngest brother, well, my brother, Sam, was born in 43, and 2 years later, in 45, sister Susan arrived. So before the end of the war, just at the end of the war, as far as Susan
Well, Dad was still in the
Oh,
40s,
he's still there.
but he was home on leave.
Yeah, he didn't come out till 46,
Yes.
did he?
And,
So
yeah.
we were a big family, and of course, when Dad was finally demobbed, he wasn't in a job that you could say was well paid. He was, I think he was on something like £2.50 a week.
and it was the same wage that he'd had in 1939.
And probably my mother was better off with him being in the army, because she kept family allowance and allowance for him being in the force.
Yes,
So suddenly all that ended, and we scratched, didn't we? I mean, we can remember it.
Yes.
If you could get sixpence out of your mum to go to the pictures with my mate, it was something. And by this time, of course, the war's finished. I'm 12, 13, growing up, and one thing or another, and money was very, very tight. I remember getting myself a paper job, but in those days you had to be a certain age before you could go out and deliver papers. But I got this job, and I'll never forget, it was 7 and 6 a week. And I used to give my mother 5 shillings, and I had 2 and 6 myself.
You were lucky to
I was
build...
lucky, you know. I mean, 2 and 6 in my pocket, and I mean, I could do things. I never smoked, so that didn't bother me. But it came in handy if Bob and I wanted to go to the pitches and one thing or another. So
I'll go to the football.
I'll go to the football. Yeah.
I mean, I should ask you, or perhaps I shouldn't ask you, which team you supported in those days. Being nearby.
My father has always been a Manchester United fan, and I grew up with being that. But at the particular time when the war finished, Old Trafford got badly damaged by bombs, and it took quite a long time to get right. So when the football season got back into the swing of things in 1946, they shared Main Road with Manchester City.
Oh, yes, of course.
So one week it was City at home, next week. But Bob and I used to go probably to both. But I was always a United fan, and I mean, obviously, I can remember all the players of those days. In 1948, that Manchester United got to Wembley, and I was 14, and I managed to get a ticket to go with my father and his young brother, Bob, and Jack, another brother, and his brother-in-law and his pal. And the six went to Wembley. In 1948, I was absolutely over the moon with that. But yeah, very happy memories of that.
Tell about when
Bob
Cunliffe.
Bob Cunliffe came in. Well, Bob was he was worse than my father. He was so biased. Being a United fan, he couldn't bear Manchester City. He was really one of those.
But,
and he came.
But you have to say that we could see Manchester City's headlights from our house.
Yes, well, yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't be that far, yeah.
So one day, I'm sat in the kitchen, I'd come home from work, and Dad was there, and Bobby's brother came in, and my young brother, Sam, came in, and he was, what would he be, 19...
Five.
No, wait a minute, he was born in 45, so he'd been about 1955, 10 or 11.
Oh.
And he said to his dad, I'm going now, I'm going to the match. So my Uncle Bob said, where are you going? So he said, I'm going with my friend. He said, well, where are you going though? So he said, I'm going to Main Road. He said, City's playing there. So he said, yeah. He said, I'm a City fan. Well, my Uncle Bob turned around and he said to my father, I'll never forget this, he said, Sam, you want to do something about that. You know, that is, you can't have that. That is nothing to, so biased he was, and that is gospel true story, that.
Do you remember going round picking up shrapnel?
Oh, I do.
And the silver tape?
Yes.
I don't remember where that came from. Was that our planes dropping that?
Do you know, I don't know. I know about the shrapnel because that probably came from ack-ack guns and that type of thing.
And bombs, of
and
course.
bombs, of course, yes.
Blew up, yeah. I'd go round the crofts and the parks and that. We would just look for fragments of bombs.
Yes.
Bits and pieces at the time.
Did you ever keep any?
No. I must have done at the time. Must have taken it home.
I expect my mother would say not keeping that rubbish.
But they don't want memories of that. But
the sort of the tape, I don't know.
That used to come down out of the sky.
Yeah, I don't know what that came off. It might have been off.
I was told it was to do with radar. That it was to disturb, but I don't know.
So maybe later in the war.
Oh yes. I would be about
they did
7.
drop reflectors.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you remember the Americans?
Oh yes, yeah.
We had an aunt, the aunt that you went to live with when Mum was ill.
Yeah.
They lived in Rusholme, Barnston Avenue, and they had Americans billeted on them.
Right.
And of course they were so glamorous. I mean, our soldiers' uniform, it was rough and coarse. And theirs was so smooth and beautifully tailored.
Yes.
Oh, they were elegant. And their caps, and of course their accent. And we all went to the cinema sometime or another. And
I can remember walking up to them and saying, have you got any gum, chum? Because they always... I'd never seen a strip of chewing gum until the Americans came. I mean, obviously... Later on in years, we used to get a packet of chewing gum with little tablets in it.
Yes.
There was 4 or 5 in a packet of those.
Yes.
But this Wrigley
strips,
spearmint
flat strips,
with strips and that, well, beautiful it was.
And they were very generous. Yeah.
Oh yes, they were.
But we had a lot of relatives. All Dad's brothers served in the war.
Yeah.
And they all came back. So Granny was very fortunate. You know, her husband had died in the first lot, but all her sons went and served and all came back safe. And my mother's brothers, one of them was a wide boy. I think John was a very honourable chap, and I think he went to the Far East. But this one, he worked in, I think he worked in the canteens for the army.
Yes.
And he'd come home and open his coat
Full of
bacon
food
and
stuff.
that he'd either nicked or bought hard. You know, I would think it was dishonestly gained, but you know, they were all at it.
We're all doing things like that. It was just
Dreadful.
Yeah, and it's.
And we still had our wheat clothes, didn't we?
Oh yes,
That was a tradition. Don't know if you know about that.
Whit Week.
Yeah.
Everybody had a new outfit for Whit Sunday, and you went round and showed people your nice new dress.
And would that have happened during the war?
Yes, because my grandmother, my dad's mother, was a tailoress, and
Yes.
she could make anything. She could make men's. When she was widowed in 1917, she was left with 6 children, and she'd lost the sight in one eye, and she'd lost her hearing having one of her children. It's a condition called otosclerosis, which has come down the generations. It's what I've had and my cousins, and it's there, mostly in the females. Although you're hard of hearing as well, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah.
But Granny used to sew. One of my father's earliest memories was sitting by lamplight or candlelight, threading needles for his mother, putting them in a pincushion, so that when she'd finished that bit of thread, she'd give him the needle and pick up another one and keep sewing. And people gave her old clothes, and I remember her telling me that somebody had given her a tweed man's overcoat, because this is in between the wars.
Yes.
And she unpicked it, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, and then she pressed it all flat, and then she cut and made trousers for her boys. Because 5 boys and a girl.
Yes.
Boys are much harder to dress, you know, but she could stitch a fly with buttons in it and she was amazing, and she made clothes. I remember she made me a tweed coat and hat when the Americans were here, and she'd made me a sailor hat out of tweed with a brown band, and it said HMS Sylvia on it. Oh, and the Americans thought that was uproarious, you know. Hi! So, yeah, we didn't do too badly, because Granny, I think, probably bought the material.
Yes.
Because my mother wouldn't have been able to find money for that. But yes, we didn't. But you see, my husband was born in Scotland, in rural Scotland. And although his father was too old for the forces, he was a weather watch, and sort of keeping watch over the area. But they had a cow, they had chickens, there were pheasant, salmon in the river, trout. They didn't know about food. There was never a food shortage, because they grew vegetables and soft fruits. So there was blackberries and blackcurrants and red currants and strawberries, and they lived a totally different way of life. So he knew nothing about rationing. It just didn't happen. No. And I think people who were evacuated to country districts didn't really have the effect.
There was more opportunity to grow things.
That's right.
Yes.
City dwellers. I mean, people did dig up their gardens to grow potatoes and things, but my mother didn't have time. She was working all the hours God sent just to keep the family ticking.
And especially with 2 additional children.
Well, that's right. Yes.
Quite often, families or parents took the attitude during the war that because the future was so bleak, they had to say, well, should we have more children or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds like there was a bit of a gap between you and your next sibling. I mean,
well, but that was where this terrible miscarriage happened.
Right, yes.
I think early in the war, and she was at death's door.
Yes.
And I think it took her quite a long time to recover. But
yes.
Yeah, I don't think the contraception was very efficient in those days.
No.
I don't know. When I went to my interview at college, the principal did what you're doing, just said, tell me about your family. And of course it was boy, girl. And she was absolutely, the perfect family. Well, she was a spinster with no children. She thought that 4 children, boy, girl. But my mother got what she wanted every time. Yeah. Every time she said, well, I'm having a boy this time, and she got it.
But there might have been another one in the middle that never actually happened.
Yes, there might have been 5 of us, yes.
That's right.
Oh. And it was hard.
Of course, when the war ended, it to a certain extent, boys of my age were not allowed to forget it, because suddenly national service came into being.
Yes.
And of course that carried on. I don't think that ended till about 57, 58.
Yes.
I think I was one of the last to go in, because I was deferred until I was 21 to finish off my apprenticeship.
Yes.
But, 2 years away, it was completely different. But I don't think it did us any harm.
Where were you stationed?
I was at Honiton in Devon. That's where I went on the train to do my training.
Oh, yes.
And then after that, I spent 18 months at Worcester. What was the name of the camp? I was 18 months. I was in the REME.
Oh, right.
Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers.
Yes.
And I didn't particularly want to go abroad.
No.
And to be quite honest with you, just before I was enlisted, I had to go in, whether you liked it or not. You couldn't get out of it unless you failed a medical. But I'd met my wife-to-be in 1953, I think, something like that. Yes. And I went in to the army in 1955. And while I was in the army, we decided to get married. And I got married halfway through my 2-year service in the September of 56.
So you were 22 by that time?
Sorry?
You were 22 by that time?
Yes. And my wife, Pat, was 20. But we were careful of the things we thought, well, while I'm in, if you're married, you get more money, you see. So
yes.
we're quite shrewd in that respect. So Pat had got a job, and I was on, I don't know, maybe £1.50 a week, something like that. But suddenly, we get married. I think a marriage allowance was something like £2.50 or £3, something like that. But she would work in Pat. She could put this money away and save it. So when I came out, we were fortunate enough to be able to buy a terraced house next to a mother and father in Moss Side.
For
£300 it was. £300 it was. But we didn't have all the money, but our dad lent us the thing. But with me working and Pat working, we soon paid him back, and it was our house.
Because there were no mortgages really in those days?
No mortgage then. I didn't have a mortgage until I moved to Brooklands in 1963. And I bought the house I'm in now for £3,100, which was an absolute fortune then.
It would have been, yes.
I remember we sold the terraced house we were in for £1,200. So I put £700 deposits. We borrowed 2004 on it, and had a mortgage with Halifax. It took 20 years to pay it off.
Yes. But the value of that house...
Oh, yes. But,
we haven't told him about some of Dad's wartime stories, about when he was in Norfolk.
Oh, yes.
Oh, the other thing is that my mother's mother died during the war.
Right.
I have a memory of her because I was about 7 when she died, and she could have been 100 years old. She was absolutely, but she'd had 13 children, so she
Talking
would
about
be
Granny
shapeless.
Cunliffe?
No,
Yeah.
yes, Granny Cook.
Granny Cook, oh, yeah.
And she, black head to foot, lacing shoes. I don't think she'd ever gone to a hairdresser's. Makeup, no, none of that. Anyway, she died, so of course the telegram went to Grandad, and of course he got compassionate leave. That telegram went through the wall, and half the men on the brink borrowed it, you know. Had this telegram. Oh, yes, right, soldier, off you go. And it became, you know, worn and many-folded and filthy and probably illegible, but that it got many an airman a weekend pass because. But on one occasion, Dad got a 48-hour pass or whatever, and because they went everywhere in uniform, and he stepped out of the the range where they were the base. He stepped onto the road and walked along a little way, and he's doing this, and a very snazzy little sports car, open, two-seater, stops with an RAF officer driving it. Where are you going, Airman? He said, well, you know, nobody ever spoke names or anything. It was all because you don't know who you're talking to. So, get in. So he got in, and they got into conversation about football and Man United and all sorts of things. And he's driving along, and he gets through Grantham and Sleaford, and he says, all right with it, you know, fine, I'm fine, yes, just carry on. And he brought him all the way to Wilmslow. That's where this officer was going. And he stopped and dropped him off. Dad said, this'll do fine, and he got on a bus and went home. Absolutely amazing, yes. And another time, he must have been at, I remember the terrible story about being at Wellesbourne.
When the aircraft came back?
No, this was to do with food. They were having a terrible time. There were weeks when they got nobody saw an egg. There was no bacon. It was pilchards. They got pilchards on toast for the breakfast, and then they'd make a pilchard pie, like a shepherd's pie with them. And this was going on for weeks. And anyway, I think they got a new CO, and he came in the queue to join with the blokes. I was supposed to get to know some of his men. And he happened to be behind my dad. And he said, how's the food here? Dreadful. So he said, well, tell me about it. So, of course, they then got the, what's it called? The quartermaster.
Yes.
And he'd been flogging all the RAF food to the hotels in Stratford. So he was court-martialed, of course. And food
improved.
Immediately improved, yes. And another story that I love to hear him tell was when he got a short break and he went to London. And this would be later on, you know, when there wasn't quite so much bombing going on. And they went into what in civilian life would be a very elegant, well-appointed gentleman's club. And of course it'd been open to the forces. And he was quite relaxed there, and he was in a great big leather armchair, loved it, you know. And as was he habit, he put his fingers down and said, oh, loose change. Oh, he thought, that's good. So he went right round, made sure he got it all, put it in his pockets, and then he thought, well, I'll try the other one. And he went round. I don't know how much he got, you know, it would be...
Enough.
Shillings and florins and half crowns and stuff, but the foot tipped out of people's pockets when they sat again.
Yes.
And another time when he went to a club and the Polish army had taken it over and were running it. And the man said to him when he was going into the dining room for something to eat, he said, I'm very sorry, all we have today is pancakes. And my father said, you're sorry? Couldn't wait. And there was Polish jam, and there was stuff that Dad hadn't seen core of the war, you know, and
Yes.
absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were, you know, happy times. The bad thing that happened to him was that he, and I can remember this because I drew a picture of it in school. You know, you had to draw a picture of your news and then write what had happened. And he must have written, or maybe he told us, that they were on, a gang of the electricians would be on duty all night, and then they'd draw lots so that the rest of them could go to bed.
Yes.
And he drew the short straw, and he had to go around all the aircraft, cycle between them, climb up, go through all the, you know, check everything. And coming out of one plane, it was icy, and he fell backwards. And nobody knows how long he was there on the floor, unconscious. Nobody missed him, you see, he was out. And so he would be, I don't know how he didn't die of hypothermia. Anyway, he came round and shook himself and got back on the bike and went and did the next plane.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's the cause of the illness that he had. I don't know. I've never known him be ill except that one time when you remember he was...
Or when he couldn't bear
He was
sunlight.
hallucinating. And
Yes.
yes.
Couldn't bear sunlight at
Yes,
all.
I think he had encephalitis. I think that's what it was. But that was the only time we ever knew him
Didn't
ill.
know him, yeah.
The only time.
Going back now to your own memories of the war, what do you remember, if anything, about VE Day?
Oh, a big party. Street party.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, tables right
We
down
had
the
a table
middle.
right. We had a cul-de-sac, and there were still no vehicles in the road, so everybody mucked in. And like Sylvia said, they put tables right down the thing, so everybody was invited in the avenue.
Yes.
The mothers and the fathers and all the children, and each family made something,
Yeah.
didn't they? That's freaked out to remember. And I've sat next to my friend Bob, and with the table, and this jelly came along. So I said, "We'll have some of that," and it was clear. And I said, "Who's made this?" So Mrs. Allcroft had made it. Oh, and it was, I don't know what it was, but it tasted absolutely dreadful.
Oh dear.
So Bob said, "I'm not eating that," and I'm not eating it either. But you know, it's just a little thing like that, but apart from anything, you know, we celebrated that, and we always celebrated.
And my dad used to carry he was very good with electrics, he would carry the gramophone, you know, the big, do you remember it? The big glossy wooden thing with the radio
music,
and the deck in it. He would carry that down to the end of the garden and have cables.
Yes.
And he would play music, and of course it would be Glenn Miller and that
course.
sort of
Yes.
big band stuff
Yes.
to entertain us. Yeah, and my mother, I don't know, she was a bit of a genius with cake. Remember, she used to make a chocolate cake.
Yeah.
How she did it, I don't know, but the stuff that was in the middle was gorgeous, like a sort of fudge thing. And Freddie Walton came to see if you were going out to play, and he, "Oh, that's a nice smell, Mrs. Cunliffe. Yes, I've just made a chocolate cake. Do you want to try it?" Well, Freddie went away, and the word went round, "Mrs. Cunliffe's made chocolate cake." So every child came knocking at the door, "Is your Lester in, or is your Sylvia in?" And all, you know, having chocolate cake.
On VA Day, it was brilliant. As a matter of fact, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the end of the war in 1995, and I was a member of a golf club, Holdsworth, along with my brother, and they decided that they're going to have a big do and going to have outside toilets, but it was going to be fancy dress. So we all had to dress up with different things. I went in an army uniform, and my wife Pat went as a nurse, and my brother, he went as a spiff, and he was in a suit, and he dyed his hair pink. And Oh, but what a celebration it was, you know.
Yes.
People went to town. I mean, I'm talking about majority of these people were of my age, will have memories of the war as well.
Yes,
so
quite.
They probably enjoyed a VE Day. The end of the war was good. To my memory, I don't think we celebrated VJ Day as much, because that was in the August of that year when the war against Japan, because it was mainly the Americans at that time that were doing most of the fighting. But VE Day was a big day, very, very big time.
Yeah. Dad, of course, worked in the bombers, and I mean, he was keeping them going, as were all the other technicians.
Yes, yes.
And at the end, after VE Day, they flew the ground crew over Germany, over Dusseldorf and Cologne, and Dad was horrified, you know, at the devastation. And they fight about it now, don't they, as to whether there had been an alternative. But that blanket bombing killed so many civilians, and
yes.
You just, I don't know.
Yeah. Dad had some horrible sights though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Aircraft that came back, that had how they'd managed to get back is beyond belief, really. But on one engine or something like that, but badly shot up. So much so that some of the crew were dead. They were killed in it.
Yes.
And they had the job of, when it was landed, of going and emptying the plane. And some of the sights you saw in there, I can remember him telling me it was awful, you know. But then they had to get to work and get that plane repaired and get it back in the air again if they possibly could.
Yes, yes.
You know, yeah, they did a horrible.
You can understand why they didn't want to talk about it. I can't. You can understand that, can't you?
Yes.
Yes. Tell the funny stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing he said was that when they were broke, which was often, he'd borrow a 10-shilling note, strictly illegal, of course, and then go around selling for a draw, you know, selling raffle tickets, raffle it at 6pence a shot. So if he made 15 bob, that was the person who won got the 10-shilling note.
Yeah.
No, he would have to make 25 shillings, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
So it was 10 bob for the man that had lent it him, 10 bob for the winner, and he got 5.
He took the 5. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Just thinking about all that you've said about the war, is there anything that you would look upon as being a legacy of the war that has affected you in later life?
Oh, absolutely. Waste not.
Yes.
Oh, frugality. Yes. Yeah. Yes. My father, right to the end of his life, couldn't waste anything. And yet my mother was the opposite. She was a spender, wasn't she?
She was.
She loved having surplus cash that she could, but, you know, and storing, keeping a food store. You've always got tins in so that if you weren't able to go out, there was food in the house. Yes, I'm conscious about things like switching lights off and and not wasting.
Yes.
That's, you know, as my dad said, if you've walked to school in women's shoes, you know what poverty is, and you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, his stories from his childhood, we ought to record them really, because they'll be gone when we've gone. And I think, although it's largely gone, I think the neighbourliness, you know, the concern. I mean, I was speaking to a friend this morning on the phone, and she lives in a cul-de-sac, and they have a telephone a diary for every member of that road. So
Yes.
every, you know, anybody in problem, they've got the phone number and they can ring for help. And she said, we're very united in that. There's a real feeling of community there.
Yes.
But there are not many places like that.
No.
I think, to be quite honest with you, the memory of it, of course, is further on, but looking back, as being a youth round between 45 and 55, was growing up and respecting the police.
Yes.
We not only respected them, we were frightened of them, because in those days, you know, if you saw a policeman walking down the street, you know, you were always wary of something
Yes.
like that. But crime, there was very little crime. It's got obviously a lot worse. But I think, you know, we grew up respecting people, didn't
Yes.
we? You know,
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Very
You would
important.
no more cheek a teacher.
No.
No.
No, never answer back.
No.
I've said to my grandchildren, you know, if I'd said that, they might be a bit lippy with me, and I'd say, if I'd said that to my mum, I'd have been the other side of the room. Bang!
Yeah, it's just. I think there was more respect for parents, wasn't there, in those days?
But we were lucky because our parents spent time with us. They were interested in us. They wanted. When I wanted to go to college, I wanted to stay at school till I was 18, and my dad, wonderful and loving as he was, still had that mindset that girls get married, it'll all be wasted, you know.
Yes.
No. And my mother stuck her heels in. She said, if she wants to go to college and be a teacher, she will go to college.
Yes.
And it was through her that... but once I became a teacher, there was nobody more supportive. He would spend a lot of time making things for me. Because, of course, the schools were hard up in the 50s.
Yes, they were, yes.
He'd collect odd pencils and sharpen them up for me, and he'd find paper. And yeah, he was very, very supportive, but he was resistant to begin with.
Yeah.
I think we've just about come to the end, but thank you very much, both of you, for really most interesting talk.
Yeah.